Hello, hello, Year 10, and let's take a look at sexual reproduction before we move on to talking about genetics, the finer points of genetics. All right, I know you guys have already started on this topic. All right, so I'm going to just be brief and kind of just get to the main points from a biological perspective about what all the fuss is about. So, when we talk about sexual reproduction, all right, we are talking about one of two processes. All right, there is either internal reproduction, which is what humans do. All right, it's called typically involves a process called copulation. All right, where a male and female engage in sexual reproduction, and you have the delivery of sperm by the male to the egg released by the female. Each of them is what is known as a gamete cell, all right, which contains half of the genetic material of each parent. They come together, they form a zygote, a fertilized egg that contains the full set of chromosomes of each of the organism, half from each of the parent. Okay. In the case of humans, we each have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. All right. And so one chromosome from each of our 23 chromosome pairs, all right, half in total of our genes is passed on down to our children. Now, the other way in which this happens is externally, such as with the frog pictured up on the top right, all right, and that's where kind of like a spray and pray situation where you have a mass of eggs, all right, usually in a aqueous environment, all right, as in the case of the bubble nest with the frog in that image, and the male frog, in the case of the frog just there, will fertilize that by spraying their gametes out into the aqueous medium. Now, a good question, of course, is if you take a look at this, pretty much all land-based animals that engage in sexual reproduction do so internally. All right, there's actually an interesting situation that's happened there. One of the challenges that organisms, when they've evolved, they've started out in the ocean, they've evolved to be on land. Okay, as they've done that, they've had to work out a way how to solve the problem of not being able to just spray out their eggs and sperm into the surrounding water and hope for the best, like fish do. Okay, all right, now some organisms, they need water to reproduce. Frogs are an example of that, amphibians and so forth. All right, others like us, dogs, cats, that sort of thing, all right, they don't need water to reproduce. What they're actually doing as part of their internal reproduction is they are taking the ocean with them. All right, they've found a way to take the ocean with them by having it inside one of the parents. Always the female. Commendation of the person who can indicate the male of the species for a particular species where the male carries the children. All righty. So put that in the comments of the video. All right, so just pointing this out, people. All right, so when we talk about the sex cells of humans and other species, we're talking about gametes. All right, typically the males produce the sperm, the females produce the eggs. All right, and that is done through a process called meiosis. It's kind of like a silent E. All right, it's not meiosis, it's meiosis. All right, and what happens is basically the cell goes through kind of like two stages of division. All right, in the first stage, you have all the chromosomes duplicating, and then the cells divide. And in the second stage, the chromosome pairs separate, and the cells divide again, and you end up with these daughter cells at the end. All right, that's the terminology for it. They call them daughter cells. It's not very PC, but it's kind of what we're stuck with for a couple of hundred years. All right, we have the daughter cells that only have half of the genetic material, one of each chromosome pair, provided everything has worked. All right. Now, if we take a look at that in comparison to the other type of cell division that occurs in our bodies, we have mitosis, which is a single stage division. All right, a single stage division that has a few stages that occur where the where the chromosomes duplicate, and then they align, then divide into the two daughter cells. All right, but each of those daughter cells has the same number of chromosomes as the original cell does. All right. So one of the things to be mindful of is that mitosis is actually for growth and repair. All right. Okay. Meiosis, which occurs in the ovaries or testicles of a human, is for production of sex cells. All right. In this case here, we have 2 stages of division, and with our final stage of division resulting in gametes that have, or sex cells that have, only half of our genetic material. All right, so why do we go through that extra stage of division? All right, what's all this fuss about sex? Well, it all comes down to variation. All right, so when you have your pairs of chromosomes actually separating in that second stage of meiosis, okay, it's not like all the chromosomes from your dad go to the left and all the chromosomes from your mum go to the right. Each pair, a random one of each pair is separated, okay? And so there is a massive number of combinations of chromosomes in each that are present in the sex cell of a human, all right, that are actually a combination of both their parents' genes, okay, and only half of the individual's total genes. So that's one way in which variation is actually produced. Another is a process called crossing over that actually results in the creation of unique chromosomes. And I'll get into that in a second with a diagram. And then, of course, the point that as a result of sexual intercourse, if fertilization and resulting pregnancy occurs, then what's happening in most cases with most animals that engage in internal sexual reproduction is, and actually just sexual reproduction in general, is random fertilization, okay? And that is where we have a random gamete from each parent meeting and forming that zygote, which means that there is another way in which many types of varied combinations of chromosomes can be brought together. And of course, the fourth way, which is when something goes wrong, all right? And we can introduce a genetic change through a mutation, and that is not always negative. Right? Sometimes it has no effect. Other times it can be positive, although that last one is typically rarer. Okay, now coming back to crossing over. Okay, now if we take a look just here, in the case of crossing over, when just using on the left hand here, just using our one pair of chromosomes, what actually happens if you take a look at the second diagram here where I have my mouse, all right, is that our lined up chromosomes start to twist around each other. And what actually happens is that they end up swapping parts of the tails of the chromosomes over with each other. All right, kind of like if you think of Play-Doh twisting around itself, and they end up, genes on those chromosomes end up swapping places and creating completely unique chromosomes that can be passed on down to offspring. All right, and that results in recombinant genotypes that are completely new and not present prior to the formation of that sex cell in that person's family. All right, now, of course, because it's their family, they're usually relatively similar. All right, but it's a way in which variation gets ensured. All right, so that kind of like wraps us up for today. We're going to be talking more about reproductive technology in our question and answer session for this week. But I thought I'll just leave us with a fun little comic. All right, okay, and I've got a link to the presentation I'll be using for our Q&A this week. We're going to talk about reproductive technology. Okay, all righty, so people, have a good day, and I'll see you for a Q&A later in the week. Bye.